Edison slid the tablet across the table. On screen was a grainy, telephoto image of me entering the black glass facade of the Sterling Vanguard building last Thursday evening. It wasn't exactly damning evidence, but it was enough for the decision they had already made. "We've received concerning reports about your after-hours activities," Edison said, his voice practiced and neutral, though his eyes remained cold. "Our employment agreement explicitly prohibits providing services to another firm while under contract here." Beside him, my manager, Finn, leaned back, his lips curling into something between a smile and a sneer. He had been looking for a reason to cut my salary from the budget for months. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of betrayal, Elias," Finn added. "While we were paying you to secure our servers, you were selling our secrets to the highest bidder." I felt a strange lightness, as if gravity had suddenly loosened its hold on me. There was no fear, no anger, not even a spark of surprise. I simply looked at the photo, then back at them. "You're terminated, effective immediately," Edison continued, pushing a heavy linen paper letter toward me. "Security is waiting outside to escort you to your desk to collect your personal items. Your access has already been revoked." I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain that the photo was taken at a public lobby. I simply nodded, slid the tablet back, and stood up. "You're right," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "I should definitely focus on one position." Their expressions flickered, a brief flash of confusion crossing their features before they settled back into professional masks. They had expected tears, pleading, or perhaps a defensive outburst. They weren't prepared for this calm acceptance. What they couldn't see was the crushing weight lifting from my shoulders as I placed my access badge on the table and walked toward the door. As the security guard stood a respectful but firm 3 feet away, I began clearing out my cubicle. The silence in the office was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard, a sound that had been the heartbeat of this department for 3 years. I was a senior systems analyst, but that title was a polite fiction. In reality, I was the invisible architect of their entire digital existence. When I started, I was part of a robust team of 6. One by one, they left, driven out by Finn's optimization strategies and the refusal to adjust salaries for inflation. Eventually, it was just me. I had built the legacy migration scripts, the automated failsafes, and the proprietary encryption layers that kept our clients' data from leaking into the dark web. I was working 80-hour weeks, effectively doing the work of an entire department, while being denied a single day of remote work. The irony of this zero-tolerance policy was almost poetic. They were firing me for a perceived lack of loyalty, yet they had shown me none. To them, I was just a line item on a spreadsheet, a high cost they thought they could finally trim now that the systems were stable. They viewed my efficiency as proof that the job was easy, not realizing the sheer amount of manual intervention required behind the scenes to keep their ancient servers from collapsing under modern traffic loads. As I tucked a small, withered succulent into my box, I thought about the second job they were so certain I had. They saw a man walking into a competitor's building and assumed I was a traitor. They never stopped to ask why a man with my expertise would be entering the most powerful investment firm in the city on a Thursday night. They were so focused on the rigid rules of their small kingdom that they failed to see the much larger game being played right under their noses. I wasn't just a moonlighter. I was an insurance policy they had just canceled. By the time I reached the parking lot, the midday heat hit me, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel the suffocating pressure of a pending server crash. I threw my box into the back seat and pulled out my second phone, the one Finn and Edison didn't know existed. The building in that grainy photo wasn't home to a competitor. It was the headquarters of Vanguard Holdings, the private equity giant that specialized in distressed asset acquisitions. For the past 8 weeks, my second job hadn't been as a coder or a consultant. I was an executive advisor for their acquisition board. Vanguard had been quietly eyeing my now former company for months, and they had hired me to perform a deep-dive technical audit of the infrastructure. While Edison was busy monitoring my badge and times, I was busy showing Vanguard that the company's record profits were a mirage built on massive technical debt and a crumbling core system that was one bad update away from total insolvency. I lived a double life of necessity. During the day, I patched the holes in a sinking ship for a manager who treated me like a servant. During the evenings, I sat in glass-walled offices at Vanguard, being treated like an expert, helping them calculate exactly how much the company's value would plummet once the reality of their tech stack came to light. I had discovered that the executive team, Finn included, had been cooking the books, deferring critical maintenance costs to make their quarterly bonuses look better. They thought they were firing a disloyal employee. They didn't realize they were firing the only person who had been keeping the distressed asset from becoming a dead asset. As I started my car, I felt no urge to warn them. They wanted a zero-tolerance environment? Fine. They could have it. I tapped a message to the lead partner at Vanguard. The internal obstacle has been removed. Proceed with the hostile takeover bid at the adjusted valuation. Everything is about to break. 48 hours. That's all it took for the reality of my absence to set in. You see, the systems at my old firm didn't just run on code. They ran on a series of manual handshakes I performed every morning at 4 a.m. to clear the cache and reset the authentication tokens. Without those overrides, the legacy database began to bloat. By Friday morning, the first ripples of the collapse appeared. Users were getting access denied errors. By noon, the internal payroll system glitched, locking every manager out of their portals. My phone, which had been blissfully silent on Thursday, began to vibrate with frantic intensity. First, it was a text from a former teammate asking where the decryption keys were stored. Then the call started. Finn called 6 times in an hour. When I didn't answer, he left a voicemail. The sneer in his voice was gone, replaced by a high-pitched, desperate edge. Elias, we're seeing some weird errors on the main cluster. Just tell us the root password for the override, and we'll call it even. We won't even pursue the legal action for the contract breach. I listened to the message while sitting in a soundproof boardroom at Vanguard Holdings, sipping a coffee that actually tasted like coffee, not the burnt sludge from the break room. On the wall-sized monitor in front of me, I watched the live market data. My former company's stock was starting to dip as rumors of a major technical outage hit the trade blogs. They were in a freefall. The irony was that they thought I had sabotaged them. I hadn't touched a single line of code since I left. This was simply the natural entropy of a system they had refused to fund or understand. They had fired the only person who knew the master key, not because I hid it, but because they had deprioritized the documentation meetings for 18 months. As the manager who fired me continued to plead with my voicemail, I was finalizing the acquisition price. With the systems down, the valuation dropped by another 20%. I wasn't just watching them fail. I was watching the price of their hubris fall into a range where my new partners could buy them for pennies on the dollar. Monday morning arrived with a different kind of energy. I didn't walk through the employee entrance. I walked through the front lobby, flanked by 4 senior partners from Vanguard Holdings and a legal team that looked like they enjoyed litigation a bit too much. The atmosphere in the office was apocalyptic. Half the monitors were dark, and the other half displayed the jagged red lines of system failure. We were ushered into the same conference room where I had been fired 4 days earlier. Edison and Finn were already there, looking like they hadn't slept since Thursday. Finn's eyes widened, his jaw literally dropping as I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the seat reserved for the presiding authority. Elias? What is this? Edison stammered, his face pale. You're under a non-compete. You can't be here with them. I'm not here as a competitor, Edison, I said, my voice calm and resonant in the small room. I'm here as the technical director for the acquisition audit. As of 8 a.m. this morning, Vanguard Holdings has acquired 51% of your outstanding debt and executed a forced restructuring. I slid a new folder across the table. This time, it wasn't a grainy photo. It was a forensic audit of the IT budget. You fired me for having a second job, I continued, looking directly at Finn. My second job was performing due diligence on this company. While you were looking for reasons to save a few thousand on my salary, you were ignoring the $3 million in embezzlement I flagged in these logs. The silence that followed was absolute. Finn tried to speak, but no sound came out. He had spent 3 years treating the company like his personal piggy bank, assuming the invisible IT guy wouldn't notice the diverted funds. I wasn't just the man who knew the passwords. I was the man who had been documenting their crimes while they thought I was just fixing their printers. The fallout was swift and clinical. By the time the meeting ended, Edison and Finn weren't just losing their positions. They were being escorted out by the same security guards they had used to humiliate me only days prior. As the dust settled, the atmosphere in the office shifted from terror to a cautious, palpable relief. I didn't spend my first afternoon celebrating. I spent it in the server room. I brought back the 3 junior analysts who had been laid off in the budget cuts last year, offering them immediate roles with the salaries they actually deserved. We didn't just fix the authentication cascade. We began building a culture where the infrastructure was finally respected. Looking back at that morning's sun glinting off the conference glass, I realized that being fired was the best thing that ever happened to my career. It forced me to stop protecting people who didn't value my protection. If you're currently the invisible pillar holding up a toxic empire, remember this: your loyalty is a premium service, not a baseline requirement. If they don't appreciate the stability you provide, let them experience the chaos of your absence. Success is the loudest form of noise you can make against those who tried to silence you. I found my professional home not by working harder for people who ignored me, but by taking my expertise where it was treated as an asset, not an expense. Thank you for following this journey of corporate justice. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever been undervalued in your own digital kingdom, take a slow with your thoughts. Have you ever seen a company collapse after losing one key person? I'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, I'm Elias, and the count